thought processes like you can do 12 things at a C or you can do 3 things at an A. If you're doing too many things, you're going to be average at all of them. But if you're focused on a few, you can excel and be an expert. I made an oath to myself that I was going to be someone who reached out to people and loved people well. I think as I continue to walk in my purpose, the things that I do become more clear and impactful, which in turn drives the intentionality.
Perfect, Brian. Well, I'm excited to have you in the room today and dive into this conversation. We're going to get to your story, and we're going to get into your definition of success today and what that means for you. But we're going to start and unpack that a little bit first before we get into that later. And you and I were talking a little bit about this, but I firmly believe that this conversation is just going to have a great impact and really change some people's perspective, and maybe they're chasing the right or wrong things through their journeys. And so again, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks you so much, Stephen. I appreciate it.
So paint me the picture. Let's take the story way back, kind of early days. Like, how did your story start? What's the environment like? What is the family like? Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and how you were raised?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am the only child of my mother and my father. My parents got divorced when I was 1.5 years old, and went on to have other marriages and divorces, unfortunately. So I do have some siblings, but was raised in my mom's home, which was pretty broken. So there was a lot of, every 4 years or so was a new marriage or a new relationship. And there was a lot of abuse, not towards me necessarily, but towards my mom, from my stepdad. Actually, the third marriage she was on, she was married for 17 or 18 years. And there was a lot of abuse there, physical, verbal, mental. And she had a child when I was 8 years old, my sister. And her father wasn't involved in the family. And so I was, by age 11 or 12, I was a father and a husband almost to my mom because of the lack of husband that she had. So yeah, it came from a lot of brokenness as a child, a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, a lot of misunderstanding, kind of like a lot of divorced children go through that, questioning, why is it me? Why did they get divorced? I visited my dad every other weekend, lived about 40 minutes away, and that was always hard to leave his home on Sunday evenings at 6. I'd be dropped off at 7, and so a lot of crying and tears and wondering during that time. So that's pretty much my first 13 to 15 years of life was that.
Throughout that, you mentioned obviously some of the challenges and struggles. If you think about some of the things that you were able to take on and learn through the hardships of that, is there anything that kind of comes to mind as you think back? Obviously, during it, you're kind of in survival mode in some of those scenarios, right? But like when you think back, maybe some of the things from your past that you're like, okay, that was something that I learned throughout that experience.
Yeah. So one of the big things that happens during those traumatic experiences, especially at a younger age, is repression, right? So you have a lot of it's bad, and there's some sprinkled in that's kind of like the sprinkles on a donut. The good things are sprinkled in, but unfortunately, when the bad gets pushed off the shelf, some of those good things go as well. But for me, I think probably one of the bigger things was in the opportunity of conflict. So when a conflict arose in the home, it was actually better to be silent and step back rather than to be loud and engage. That was probably one of the biggest things. And I still struggle with that because I oftentimes, being a zealous person, I just want to dive in and be vocal. But from a leadership standpoint, and also from just a growth standpoint, wisdom was given at an early age because of that, where I'd have to step back and try to take my mom and have her step back, and have my sister and all of us step back and be silent so that we can let the situation pass, and then we can approach it once we have calmed down and had conversations and can be level-headed and actually have be successful in it, right? And actually take steps to fix what was happening.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
No, definitely. And it's something that you already started to, shed a little bit of light on how some of those experiences and the stories that you told, you were able to bring new beliefs into your future, and then able to take those and just turn them into something that you can use in your leadership, use in your relationships today.
Right.
And now there is obviously a gap between some of the things you talked about with leadership and then your growing up, your childhood, and a lot of things probably happened between there that helped shape you become who you are today. Can you fast forward a couple of years? Tell me a little bit about, after some of those experiences and upbringing, kind of education, kind of first jobs, kind of what was that history like for you?
So I started working when I was young, 15, at a local grocery store. That was part of that, still that dark period a little bit. The home life was kind of the dark period. So when I was in the public eye, working in school, extracurriculars, those types of things throughout high school and beyond, the late teens, early 20s, I made an oath to myself that I was going to be someone who reached out to people and loved people well. Mm. And I don't know how or why, but I think it was because it was dark at home. When I got to the light, essentially, I wanted to just love people well. So to carry on, so 14, 15 as a freshman, I walked into the high school, and I was 5'5", 225. I was like a little butterball turkey, just a little outcast kind of. Plastic frame glasses, because we were on welfare, that was my life. And I walked into the high school, and then I said, I'm going to shake every person's hand that I could come in contact with and just love them. And I don't know where that courage came from or what that looks like, but I remember vividly walking down the senior hallway with these, 6 foot almost men, right? Men and women, and reaching out my hand and saying hi and introducing myself. And I got many mixed emotions and mixed feelings from that, but I didn't even realize that was creating who I was, right? That was my personality, my character, instilling that charisma that I've been blessed that I have now. And that started out of coming from the darkness and moving to the light. So did that my high school career and ended up being voted everyone's friend and class clown, because that was part of that mix, right? Trying to have attention that came from outside the home, but also loving people well. So I worked at the grocery store, and actually got fired after about a year and a half because I wasn't working well. I was the stock boy, cart boy kind of thing, and I went to McDonald's for a few months, and then they called me from the grocery store and said, hey, mind you, I got fired. They called me and asked me to come back in a different role as a cashier, which is even more crazy because that's kind of an upgrade, right? And then I started working the customer service desk, and I did that for another year and a half, 2 years after that, and I graduated high school during that time period. Went off up to Northern Michigan University for 1 semester. Was pretty sheltered because of the home life. So when I got to Northern Michigan University, which I was on a full ride with the tuition incentive program that Engler had signed in back in the early 2000s, because of us being on welfare and assistance. And I partied for the whole semester, and I got kicked out. I went to 16 classes in those 4 months. So I went home and started working. So and actually that's kind of had that transition into the food industry. So I was in the food industry from age 19 to 28. Gotten leadership there, and that's kind of how I worked my way into leadership.
I love that story about walking down the hallway and shaking everyone's hand and just saying that, hey, I want to reach out and I want you to know that you're being seen and that, someone's here and wants to be your friend and wants to encourage you. And then that you were able to carry some of that through to even what you're doing today. And some of your social, background came out during college too, and had the opportunity to take advantage of that. And even though there were pivots, right? Because you had plans to, what were you going to school for at that time?
I actually was going to school for accounting.
Okay.
And it was just because of career assessment and planning class that I had in 9th grade.
Okay.
I was really good at math, detail oriented, and that was the thing. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go be an accountant. And I veered off that course, which is either here nor there. I'm in mortgages now, right? So that is, I guess, similar, just a little bit different, road. But yeah.
If, maybe think about that, the first year of college or right around that time frame, if you remember, like, what was it that you wanted to be in the future? Was it having a family? What were some of those key visions or things that you were reaching for at that age? If you remember.
Yeah. So those pieces or those items were a family. So I started dating my wife in high school. We were high school sweethearts. We were friends for 3 years, went to junior prom together as friends, and then started dating our senior year. And she came to Grand Valley and I went to Northern. But that was where the trajectory of desiring to say, okay, I'm going to, before I had gotten displaced from Northern, the hope was, okay, graduate in 4 years, I'll be 22, by 23, have a job, 24, 25, get married, then get a house, that was, so by 26, be married and maybe start having kids. And that went right down the poop chute in about 4 months, because then I had to go back and work. And but we did a long distance relationship for 2 years, and in 2003 I moved down here at the age of 20, and so I've been here ever since. So
now when you think through the kind of trajectory, obviously you had some pivots over the years, whether it was in college or even some of the things that you were set up with early on. Were there any moments when you look back and you're like, that was a major trajectory change in my future? Like, I am where I am today because of that thing or those couple moments that happened that I didn't expect to come up or happen.
Yeah. So that's where my relationship with the Lord actually began to happen, was through leaving Northern, going back home. My wife was an only child, so when she came home, I would actually want to be at her house. So she came from a pretty strict Baptist background. And being an only child, I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't really care. So I had asked her parents, hey, can I come and stay at your house when she's home? And they said yes. I was like, oh, this is cool. So, but they said, you have to sleep in the spare room and you have to come with the church with us on Sunday. I said, oh, that's easy. I was raised in a Catholic home, so I would go to church when I was at my dad's house every other weekend. Church is easy. And when she left and came back to Grand Valley, I continued to go to church with them, and then started on a Tuesday morning men's group with my soon-to-be father-in-law. And then in December of 2002, which is 1 year after I left Northern, in their driveway, I accepted Jesus. And that was, when I look back for like a crux of, or a pivot or a crux of belief or life, that was where I turned and went the other way, and I didn't even know it was happening, really, until I'm here 22 years later, where I left the old behind and I shed that skin and I walked in new life. And that is really what's been the rudder for my life currently, since then until now. And it continues to be that solid rock that I stand on. And quite amazing. It boggles my mind on a daily basis, actually, that the Lord would choose me and to allow me to live out my purpose and to love people well, along with and trust me in with 4 children and a wife, and in relationships that I just truly treasure personally and professionally. So,
yeah. It's you mentioned that you didn't even know it was to the extent that it was impacting your future at the time, right? And I know that a lot of times when you think back to the past and just think through different experiences, some are, big. You're like, oh man, this is going to change my life forever type things. And it turns out that it doesn't quite as much as you thought so at the time. But then other times are just slowly things that are really changing the way that you think, believe, and treat others. And that is really, those slow changes are what impact your future, and look back and you're like, wow, I'm glad that happened. That was amazing.
Yeah, in some of the notes while we were preparing for this, I mentioned, I wrote down there were multiple stepping stones. And sometimes stepping stones don't look like positive things, right? They're not like, oh, this is the best. Like now when we looking to be confident in laying out a plan for our future, our surroundings, the people, situations, we want them to be pretty concrete and want to see know what they're going to be. And when we step on them, be confident that those are the things. And I think in reality, life isn't that way, right? Life is about all the opportunities that are small steps that we didn't even know that we were going to have to take that could have hurt us sometimes. Like I was let go from a position. That's how I got out of the restaurant industry. Mm-hmm. I was let go, but it was harmful for me to be in it. And I didn't even realize it until I was let go. And then I pivoted to the next thing, which is stronger faith in better for my family, right? So there's a lot of those things I think that they might seem like curses, but the reality is if we embrace them and we don't come to a conclusion as to what they are until we get past them, at that point we can start evaluating it properly and saying, oh, that thing was actually so good for me. And I, as weird as it sounds, from the world standpoint or for people looking at you, it looks really bad, but it is really good. And I'm so thankful it happened.
Now, during some of those times when you're in it, you're like, okay, this is tough. Like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this type scenarios.
Yeah.
Were there people that you can think back on that, came alongside you or that were mentors or, just partners with you throughout that?
Yeah. So I think for me, one constant was my father-in-law. My father-in-law has been far enough away that I can continue to do what I'm supposed to do, but close enough when I need him to be close enough to speak wisdom. And then along the path, I had many leaders in the restaurant industry, in the embroidery industry. Like I had mentioned, I was an operations director in the mortgage industry, or not mortgage, embroidery industry. And they were mentors along the path that just would give me things that I still use today. Thought processes like you can do 12 things at a C, or you can do 3 things at an A. What do you want to do, right? If you're doing too many things, you're going to be average at all of them. But if you're focused on a few, you can excel and be an expert. Now, I think that was when I was 21, from a restaurant manager. So a lot of those little things, I didn't really have someone that was a solid mentor and friend the whole time. And there's a desire for that. But I did see that the Lord was faithful and provided the person I needed in the right time for the right thing to get me to the next step in my purpose.
Mm-hmm. For a reason.
Yep. For a reason,
yep.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can think back to those scenarios where someone's giving you a piece of advice of, focus on a couple of things, do those really well, versus 12 C's type scenario.
Yeah.
And you just kind of think back of like, why did they take the time to do that with me, right? Take the time to work through that with me, take the time to Was that, in some scenarios, it's like, well, because they were literally just trying to get me to be good at a job.
Right.
But in other scenarios, it's like because they maybe could see themselves in that type of situation. Maybe they had gone through something similar in the past, and then they had learned from it, and then someone told them that, and so they're like, okay, I want to help Ryan in this way, and I want to support him throughout his journey in those steps. I think I know the answer to some of these, but I'm going to ask, what is your opinion on, as you're getting into these things happening throughout your life, on, hey, were these things that were very intentional, that you were able to put the right pieces in the right places, kind of intentionally to drive this certain outcome, some of it luck, some of it based on there being a greater intention for the future than what you had in mind at the time, and it just was a plan that you didn't set. Kind of what are some of your thoughts on intentionality, and were these things that you put into place?
Yeah, so I think for me, there's been, let me look at my notes really quickly here. To answer that question, I think the answer is and. So this is what's been on my mind and heart for the past year, specifically, because I'm really diving into like looking introspectively more on a daily basis, as we mentioned earlier. And the Lord, because when I look to do things intentionally, I say, Lord, am I supposed to do this? My prayer time, or am I supposed to do this? And he very confidently and continues to bring up the word and. It's not about this or this. It's about doing this and this. And there are seasons for that, right? So I need to be intentional and disciplined in certain areas in a certain season. But there's also situations that I can't control. And it might be because I'm doing the intentional things, which is a blessing, but it was unforeseen, right? So things pop up and it's like, okay, how do I pivot? You use that term from this, or is this supposed to be the result of the actions that I'm intentional about, right? And consistency in that intentionality is difficult, right? So that's where you see the and more often, where the outside influences can impact us. It have impacted me to where my intentionality has gone away from the things that I want to be intentional on. It has turned me to be intentional on things that I didn't think I would be intentional on. More hot button issues with family or with, professionally, with a new job that I have to have, or whatever that looks like, through the seasons to provide for my family and to really strive to live my purpose. Because that's really, for me, the intentionality, along with experiential pieces that I can't control. In all of those, I want to live my purpose, right? We've talked about this in the past, but I believe that I'm writing a book called Our Sole Purpose. Mm-hmm. Shameless plug. And maybe we'll talk some other time about that in more in depth. But because I'm confident that every human being was created for a purpose, in that soul that we have, the life that we have, despite anything that happens intentionally, by our own admission, intentionally or outside source, we have a driving piece that should continue to pull us back and have us look at it and say, is this part of my purpose? Am I doing the thing right? Do I have to change certain things intentionally to be living in that? And if so, let's go ahead and move forward with that, and let's do that. But for me, it's both, right? It's that and word. There are things that I'm intentional on a daily basis, and there are things more often than not that happen experientially that are outside of that intentionality, which affect this and all the other areas of my life.
You brought up through that too, how that potentially changes with different seasons or different phases throughout your life. Can you explain what some of those seasons maybe have been for you?
Yeah, it's good. So this is there were a lot of seasons. Continue moving down here to the Grand Rapids area in 03. My wife and I got engaged in 03 in July. We found out she was pregnant in January of 04. We had our son. 18 days later, we got married. 3 days later, we moved in together. That was one of the first seasons of my life where I had to be man up. As the book says, I had to man up. And praise God that I was able to take responsibility, and say, because of the trajectory that I desired to see from my past, or not desired to see, right? I didn't want to continue these generational struggles. When my wife revealed that, soon-to-be wife revealed that she was pregnant, that moment, and then we talk about it all the time, actually. And we have a son now who will be 21 in May and is in his third year at Grand Valley as well. We talk about these things all the time, where we have I had a decision to make, and I became a husband and a father. And I'd wake up every day for the first couple of years and look at my hand, and I had a ring, and look to the other side, and there was a bassinet. And that really just continued to solidify one of the seasons of life that I had in the past, and like seeing these things come to fruition, like, oh wow, I've been entrusted now. Like I have responsibility. And through those seasons, I had lost, we had moved to Minneapolis. Let me give you that example. A couple of years later, we moved to Minneapolis for a 6-month stint because my wife was a professional runner. She ran at Grand Valley and then ran for New Balance. She was a pro runner at New Balance. So we moved to Minneapolis 4 months after we bought a house. Very foolish. Actually, that's one thing I wrote down about what I had learned the most in the past 20 some years is to be cautious with quick, large decisions. And usually they're made out of irrationally if we are quick, right? Slow down, especially if it's a large decision, which, it sounds like common sense. So when you come from 20 years of not having consistency in making decisions similar to that, you have no clue until you make the wrong one, right? So that season kicked off a season where we actually ended up going bankrupt. We moved back to Allendale, and 2008, 2010, we went bankrupt because we had 2 houses, and they stopped paying rent in one of them, and so we went from a 2,600 square foot home actually in your neighborhood to a 900 square foot duplex on 60th Ave here in Allendale, to the trailer park behind Pepino's, and then to finally own a home again in 2015. And I lost my job in the restaurant business in 2010. So we went bankrupt, I lost my job, and we had our second child all in a 6-month period. That's a season.
Yeah.
That's a season. So yeah, that's just some of the restaurant time, right? From the 2002 to 2010. But seasons of life, really, it's not about the professional piece in that. It's about what I've gone through in my family life, and how I have to purposefully lead them, even though the decisions we made might have been irrational at the time. It might have caused other consequences. Leaders are built, right, after decisions are made, and how we react and how we affirm and how we move forward from that. And that's what I've learned. I've learned that throughout the seasons, that being one of the biggest ones, but through job transitions and what have you.
I love that you've taken that like word or that title leadership, and you didn't just apply it towards, the business concept, which is what we typically think about, like leading a team, right? Mm-hmm. But you put it into leading your family through tough times. And I guess what I'm curious about is, how did you step into that? How were you able to kind of find the strength to lead the teams or lead your family through that time? Was that something where you look back and like, okay, this was things I had to be intentional with my mindset, with things that I had to tell myself? Was this things, just more time in prayer and more time in your faith? Was this things where it's like, okay, I had specific routines or tricks that I could work my way through? Was there anything like that?
Yeah, that's great. So this is, ironically, the word "and" has been the word that's been on my mind the past year, but there were a lot of things during those time periods in that season that really assisted in my leading my family well. And this sounds crazy, maybe, but one of the biggest pieces is there were times I just had to do and not think.
Okay.
If that makes sense. It's kind of like, having to shovel the sidewalk when it's 0 degrees outside. You just have to go do it. If you think, well, it's going to be too cold, my body's going to be aching, you're just not going to go do it. And then you're going to have 2 feet of snow and you're just lazy. Right? But that's kind of what happened during this time, right? When everything falls apart and all the cards fall and the house of cards falls and you have nothing, you have a responsibility and this is what I did on a daily basis. And my wife encouraged me well on this, but I just knew I had to do. So I'd wake up every day intentionally not thinking about what I didn't like about life, and I was not planning for the future. Because there are seasons for that as well, right? For that brainstorming, that growth, that desire, that passion, which if you read most purposeful passion success books, they talk about the plan, and you plan it out and you just stick to it no matter what. It sounds great, but unfortunately they're not applicable 50% of the time or more, because that's not how life works. Right. And I think that this is probably the biggest piece. I'm thankful that I get to be here to discuss this, right? Is in those times that I went through those seasons, I wasn't able to plan. I was living in my purpose. Maybe it was because of a consequence, because of my prior actions, but the reality is I still had the gifts, the mindset, the desire, the drive to do this great thing. But at this time, I just had to do this thing, which might have looked like a lowly job or cowardly thing, but that's how I had to leave my family. I had to provide. I just went and worked and didn't brainstorm about the future as much and didn't dream. And it sounds kind of sad, but the reality is there are going to be seasons like that, right? And hopefully at some point, where I think I'm here now, where I can do many things because I've been gifted the skill sets to do that. If I didn't go through those things in the past, I would not be able to say, okay, I'm planning out my business. I do mortgages full time. I have 4 kids and a wife, and they're all involved in a ton of things. I'm on 2 or 3 boards. I wouldn't be able to say I could do those things. And I feel I could still do those things all at a level because I've been stretched in seasoned by the seasons.
Now, you've mentioned purpose a couple of times, purposeful. I think like motivations, what's been driving you over the years, and has that changed? And maybe that purpose piece is part of it. That was one thing, and through the different seasons, it's changed for you. But what are some of those motivators for you, external, internal?
I think there are a few. The greatest one, of course, with the faith piece. And this is something that this is how I conclude the book, or I'm planning on concluding the book because I'm almost done writing it. Jesus said the words that we all should desire to see or hear, which is, well done, good and faithful servant. That's when our soul is taken out of our body, and now we're just a body, and that soul gets, goes to heaven, hopefully, right? That'd be the goal. And that's my purpose. That's what I strive for. And in that affects the sphere that I surround myself with, that affects how I treat my family, that affects how I act and speak and do business. And I think to really encompass or answer your question, it hasn't changed. The purpose or the driving force really hasn't changed, but it becomes more and more clear on a daily basis as I walk the steps in obedience. as I move forward. As I do my intentional things, which is, prayer, Hal Elrod with the Miracle Mornings, right? I went through that, and there are some pieces of that that savors, that I stick to. Mainly the prayer, meditation, getting the word, time block, do some of those things on a morning basis so that I can set my days up well and stay motivated. Because I still, just like every human, go through the seasons of not being motivated. I just had one prior to Christmas, just here in November, December. Actually, our conversations, it started helping me get out of those depressive thoughts and not being motivated. But yeah, I think as I continue to walk in my purpose, the things that I do become more clear and impactful, which in turn drives the intentionality and in turn pushes me closer to fulfilling my purpose.
Yeah, you have that vision and that future, and the decisions that you make, and even you mentioned your sphere and like who you surround yourself with is different because of the understanding of what that purpose is for you and what you believe. The reason is that you're having conversations, you're having interactions with individuals, and you're meeting new people. I'm curious on if you have a specific story around something in regards to your environment, your network, kind of who you're surrounding yourself with, how you're able to find people that you feel like are helping you live out your purpose, or, maybe you can get involved with people that you can live out your purpose because they're these types. Like, how have you been able to find the right network and the right group over the years that help you live out your purpose?
There are many ways. So, of course, I was in ministry. I didn't mention that yet, but in 2012 to 2020, I did ministry full-time while I worked full-time, went to school part-time, kept having a kid every 3 years. Pretty chaotic 8 years of my life, but still married and have 4 kids. So that's a blessing. But for me, I'm very intentional about following people. And this is my hope for that people would do the same thing for me. And this is how they would build their spheres. But I like to watch people from afar. Like, how do we compose ourselves? Is it aligned with the way I compose myself? One reason I met you at the No Honesty book signing there. There was some synergy, right? There was, this is interesting. We had a great opportunity, and then we met, and now we're here. But that is how I do life and business in my profession. I follow people on social media venues. I go to places where they are, and I want to understand them better to see if we align well. And if we do, then I want to connect out of a motive of understanding that there will be an opportunity to be an influence in my sphere and vice versa. Because I don't want it to just be a one-way street, right? I don't look for people. I'm not looking for a gang where I'm the ringleader. I'm looking for a group of people that I can do life with and be transparent with and love well, and they'll hold me accountable and I'll be able to hold them accountable. And I think that's important. And I think too often people separate those professional and personal lives, which is okay. For me, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work that well for me, because integrity means you are who you are. If no one's looking, right? You do the right thing. But the reality is, integrity is you are who you are no matter what situation you're in. No matter if you're at church, or if you're at family affair, or you're here, or, if you're leading big groups, or if you're at war. Who you are is who you are to the core. And if you're not, you're lying to yourself and to everyone else, right? So when I'm looking to build those spheres, I'm looking for people that are going to be like-minded, that can help me grow. Some people, there are times where I look for people that are the next step ahead of where I'm at, so I can strive for them, but also people that I can possibly mentor that are one step behind me. I think that's a big piece that I've been learning more in the coaching business as well, in the consulting business, right? And I just read this in a book the other day, where coaches and consultants usually are just one chapter ahead in the book than the other people. And that just hit me really well, because usually, oftentimes when you're leading something, you don't feel as confident. Like you don't have anything to give, and I hear those whispers all the time. And that's one thing I wrote down in my notes, is we have to silence those whispers. So look for people that are going to build you up, hold you accountable, and encourage you. And those are the folks that will stick around you for a long period of time.
Love it. Yeah, love the intentionality with paying attention and watching those that you can relate to, or that they're telling a story that's like, okay, yeah, there's some synergies here.
Yeah.
The saying, your frequency is what you frequently see, it comes to mind. Just the idea of like what you talk about, what you describe, your aura is what attracts that same type of person, right? So if you are excited or passionate about, let's just use simple examples, pickleball, or bowling or something like that, you talk about those things. Others also that are passionate about those same things will attract to it. So if you're putting out content like you are on LinkedIn very well, and you're talking about leadership, and you're talking about these things that have impacted you in the past and are impacting you today, others that can relate to that are going to be drawn to you and become part of your sphere, that then you're going to be able to do life together. So you telling your story is giving you the ability to kind of attract more, and also encourage maybe some of those that you might never know, might never connect with, might never have a conversation with, but yet they were able to learn from your experience because you were willing, and you went out there, and it was probably a little uncomfortable, but you went out there and told that story. And you mentioned a little bit about mentoring and getting involved with that side. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do there?
Yeah. So I really desire, so there's a couple of things. There's one avenue that I'm actually pursuing right now, which is pretty neat. I'm actually looking to become a chaplain at Grand Valley State University for the athletics. There's a ministry here out of Lifestream in town called Mariah Ministries, and they actually run the chaplaincies at Grand Valley. And we're a very athletic family. And I want to mentor them, right? I want to be close to them and be available to talk to them about life. And maybe they have the relationship with the Lord if they have one, or if not, just be there to encourage. I've always had a passion, and I never was able to jump into this, but for like big brothers, big sisters, because I had a son at 21. So I had my son, so I was a father. But I've always had a passion to do that type of stuff. And I've started to pursue that more recently, be it with nonprofits or with the chaplaincy, to just be present with those that are younger or at a different stage of life than I am, and have transparency so they can have hope. Because oftentimes we hear things like, here's the steps, read the books and we watch the podcasts and we go through all these different messages, but we don't have opportunity to speak to someone about application. We don't have someone to actually look at and say, oh, wow, it doesn't look like the book. Their life doesn't look like the book, right? But look where they are. And that's what I want to bring, right? Like, do you look at my past? If you looked at the past 41 years, almost 42 years now, it's crazy, like it's just, it doesn't look like, some people wouldn't label it successful, right? But that is what drives me, the desire to mentor. And any environment that I'm in, like I just had a gentleman that was in mortgages, started about a year after I didn't. And he just left the industry because he was called to do something different. But we started meeting every like 3 months, and I didn't even know what I was doing. But again, I was one chapter ahead of him. So I started mentoring him, and we started talking about the seasons of mortgages and in real estate and what that looked like. And we would just share lunch and share life. And out of that, I mean, he made it 2 years in the industry. I've been in the industry 3.5 now, but he found out it wasn't for him. But at least, as one of my colleagues and friends told me in a meeting 2 weeks ago, at least he gave 100%, and he went out knowing that it wasn't the right thing, but he gave everything. And that's what I want to bring out in people, right? Is to encourage them to give 100% in whatever they're called to do. And if it changes, that's okay, and be okay with that. But know that you gave everything you had to try to be successful in that area.
Yeah. Thanks for that story. And then also your willingness to jump in and support a colleague and mentor, even, with the athletics department and different departments like that. I'm curious, in that specific example, was the process of being a mentor, did that help you did that push you? Like, for example, I've been feeling this a lot lately, right? Like the best, you always hear like the best way to learn is to teach others, but also you work hard to become a better person, like you do for your family and you do for your employees, for those that you're teaching. So if he is a chapter behind you,
right?
Did you feel like some type of motivation to go out and learn something new, to go out and try different tactics so that you could teach him, but in turn you were, becoming a, better at that specific task as well?
Yeah, it definitely kept me crisp.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the big piece, right? That I knew that if I lacked, I wouldn't have anything to bring, right? So that really spurred me to say, like, I need to be engaged all the time. And maybe ironically, and I didn't even think about this till this moment actually, but in mortgages, the season, the depression season, which is what I would call it with him, when we talked about the seasons, that happens like mid-October through the rest of the year because people kind of go on vacation at the holidays in our industry. That's when I found out he was leaving the industry. So it is interesting how you had mentioned that and you asked that question. And that probably played into me having a little bit deeper depressive type season because I didn't have that person to look forward to, maybe, and I didn't, again, I'm just talking this out right now because I never thought about it that way until you mentioned that question. But yes, it spurred me on to have to continue to learn, to give 100%, because if I didn't, whenever we would meet for lunch, there was accountability in that, which is ironic, isn't it? The person you're mentoring is holding you accountable just because you have to bring something to the table, right? And you can't hold somebody accountable or encourage them unless you're actually doing the thing, right? Isn't that the craziest part about it? And that's just relationship in general, but yes, from a mentoring standpoint, and that's the exciting part, right? That's the other flip side. That's what keeps it fun. That's what I get pumped about, and that's part of my purpose too. That if you had purpose was a pie, that would be a good 33% of it probably is just that driving force of investing in people. Call it mentorship, call it what it is, but through transparency and talking about life and my experiences, people can take that and be impacted and grow. And that's what keeps me stepping forward. This is for my purpose for sure.
Doing it for someone else, but at the same point, you're getting a benefit out of that. Yes. As well. And, it's not the main benefit that you're trying to get out, but it is proving to be one of the more impactful ones that are leading towards changes, and growth in your personal life and things like that as well. I'm curious, as you kind of go back and think through over the years, different positive habits that you've been able to set in place into your life, maybe that have, you're like, okay, these are things that have been an impact on my trajectory and my success over the years, and kind of gotten to help me get to where I'm at today. Is there any habits that come to mind? You mentioned the miracle morning,
yep,
and things like that.
Yep. So, I mean, it has changed. It's evolved throughout the years, which I think it goes along with the seasons. But the most consistent thing that I try to focus on and remain in is the faith piece. Because I know that, and I think this is for all of us, and I don't want to blanket statement, but I think for all of us, we are looking for something that's going to help us be strong foundationally before we can actually do something or build something, which for some people it's exercise in the morning, right? There's a bunch of different things, right? Getting up early, going through routines, For me, that has been seasonal as well, right? And I went through seasons of Fit Body Boot Camp where I'd wake up at 5 a.m. and I'd go do it, and it was the best. I'm so competitive. So I'd go there and just knock out workouts and get super healthy. And then there's seasons where I've lost that. And with family and with business, those things change. But probably the things that stick out the most are, being in the Bible, and in prayer, and also being intentional with the time I have with my spouse. Which again, that sounds like, okay, what does that have to do with business? Or, that's pretty personal. Monthly date nights with my wife, real close to the top of the list. Spending time with her keeps me grounded in the household, but also me personally, because she's able to communicate what I need to work on, which she has the inside scoop. You know what I mean? Like, we have these groups that we have cohorts we talk to that are influence, accountability groups, and what have you. They don't have the inside scoop. They only have what you give them, right? I live with a personal accountability partner. So spending time with my wife and investing in her, along with my foundational faith, those pieces have been probably the biggest pieces that have been consistent. And even when I gave her a kiss and left the house today, and I said, hey, pray for me, I'm going to go do this. I'm super excited. And she was excited as well. And she's able to see me living out my purpose because of me being intentional with her, and then also being me being intentional in my faith. So yeah, I think those are probably the biggest pieces that have remained consistent. And I think we have to find those and be okay with those intentionalities being different by season. Because it's easy to be like, I get down like, oh, I don't do that anymore. I wish I did that. Now it's a new thing, right? And be okay with it being replaced. It's going to happen. When we're 60, it's going to be different than when we're 30. That's just the way it is. When our kids are adults, it's going to be different than when they're toddlers. We have to be okay with those things and kind of go with ebb and flow with those, but still be intentional and say, no, I am going to have these disciplines. Like I said, getting up at a decent time, reading book. I read a lot now. Been starting to get into audiobooks a little bit more as well, intentionally. Actually, this sounds crazy maybe, but reading and doing an audiobook at the same time. I don't know if that's popular or not, but for me, it's blown my mind. I'm doing the Bible in a year and I have it read to me, and then I read it at the same time, and I get like 300% more out of it. It is the craziest thing. And again, probably you're nodding like other folks.
I've done that before with Audible. Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah.
It just, it's a new addiction, actually.
Gets me to buy the book twice, right? I buy it on Audible and on they ship it to me and then
say no. They know what they're doing. Yeah.
Yep. Sell twice as much that way.
That's right.
No, I love that example, and even you bringing your family into the conversation so much, and your wife as well into the intentionality on date night. I know that's especially when our focus a lot of times ends up being go, do more, and work harder. Sometimes the ones that suffer for us are the ones that are the closest to us, and they're actually the ones that we tell ourselves we're doing it all for. And then the question is, like, did they really ask us to do that, or did they literally want us to go on date night?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's huge. I actually, and this is, I actually have thought about this pretty in depth as I was preparing for this, but just in introspect and kind of looking at my life. For me, my center of influence or my sphere of influence is very much like a bullseye. And I work my way out from the middle of the bullseye to the outside of the bullseye. And that's where I put my time and energy. And I want my influence to be the greatest, right? So for me, the Lord is the bullseye. And then myself is actually the next ring, because I know that if I'm not right, how can I love other people well? And then it goes to my wife, and then my kids, and then my family and friends, and then business partners are outside of that. And sometimes those business partners become family, friends, and and those can ebb and flow a little bit. But if you think about it from a bullseye standpoint, you have an opportunity to accurately and correctly place your time and still have impact on, because the bullseye, you actually have this piece of this structure of relationships, and there's going to be times when you're just going to throw the dart at other spots of the dartboard, right? And you're doing it intentionally, but you're still able to have impact on every single one of those rings, and how you allot your time. And again, it's different in every season, but I think it's wise to structure relationships that way, and make sure that you're not imbalanced, right? Or out of balance. Because again, you just mentioned it briefly, but that can all fully be flipped. And maybe it's a season where I started a new business and the outside ring has to be the inside ring for a small season. Those things happen. But to have consistency and to walk in purpose and to have strong relationships, you have to have structure in that. And that's how I personally do it.
Love it. No, yeah, thanks for breaking it down and just talking through how the intentionality of even when you're in those seasons, hey, this is just a season. Here's the main purpose, and my priorities aren't messed up. It's just, and this is where we're at right now because we have to take this step before we can take the next one. Now that you've taken us through a little bit of your background, and thank you so much for telling some of the stories that you did. Like I said, I'm confident that this conversation is going to help a lot of people as you go through and think about your younger years, looking back, maybe what's something that you would like that you could potentially say to yourself or say to someone at that age that's kind of starting out their journey, some of their beliefs around success or their purpose. What's something that you could say?
Actually, I think this is super impactful. I think it's wise to be cautious of the deception of the current season, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit. But just because you are in depression now, or in a depressive state, or you're really focused on the future, or you're maybe a little overzealous, those are just attributes of where you're going, right? And oftentimes those misguided or those struggles and seasons that you're in are because we're so focused on an arrival. Success isn't an arrival. We have to evaluate the situation when we get through the situation, and we look back, and that's when we evaluate success. We don't evaluate success while we're in it. Success should be evaluated by us personally, and it should be after we're done with the season. And maybe while we're in it a little bit, but usually it's when we get to the end of the season, when we have accomplishment or we've done something, right? For the younger folks, or for myself, I would say silence the whispers. There's going to be a lot of people that want to influence you, and that's okay. But discernment is key, right? There's going to be a lot of people speaking in your ear, especially as you grow in influence. Discern which voices to listen to and what not to. And I think that I think those are the big pieces, right?
100%. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Now, if we had to get to a formal definition, or your definition of success, which you've already alluded to a few different times, but what is your definition of success?
So success has two components. It's about relationship and it's about purpose. For me, and I'll pick up my phone because I want to read it off my phone, and I have it on the front page of my phone, but for me, it's actually a scripture, and it's Colossians 3:23. In Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as for working for the Lord, not for human masters." Goes back to intentionality. Goes back to your why, as Simon Sinek would say, right? It starts with why. It's about why you're doing the things you're doing. in looking to fulfill your purpose will ultimately lead you to areas that are most often considered successful. Maybe not from the outside world, but from your internal place and from the sphere, as I mentioned in that dartboard, from the middle to the outside. That's success.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that definition, and thanks for sharing your story today. Now, if anyone's interested in connecting with you, what's the best way to reach out and get connected?
Probably through email or phone, right?
Okay.
At bzemba83@gmail.com is my personal email. Or my phone, 616-490-2835, super easy. Also on LinkedIn, Brian Zemba. There are more, but I'm the one and only.
Exactly.
So yeah, those are probably the easiest avenues. And then watch again, another shameless plug, but watch for our Soul Purpose, hopefully coming out by the midsummer season between Q2 and Q3.
Looking forward to it.
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Brian. Great to have you on, and thanks for your conversation today.
Appreciate it.